Welcome! In this video, we're going to talk about the beginning of Ssangsu Geombup 7, Part 1. As usual, with some exception, I'm wearing this uniform not because the form itself is not canonical, again, it's as canonical as I know it to be up until this point, but because the interpretation and all that fun stuff is mostly of my own doing or my own breakdown, stuff like that. An observant viewer might notice I left my blank black belt at home, so we're just going to ignore the fact that we're wearing this belt, but we're going to keep it like I wasn't. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the beginning of the form. To begin with, a new draw, right? I'm going to do it from over here, right? So the idea is I'm going to be drawing into a one-handed center cut in a deep, deep long stance, right? So someone's coming in, I'm going to draw up all the way behind, again, centering up along the spine if you need to. They shouldn't be touching the spine necessarily, but it should be behind. You can go into as deep of a front stance as you want, into a big center cut, ending like an inch or two above the ground, with a nice like, yeah! And you're going to draw back into our chiase, or our low guard from here. So again, low guard is actually one of my favorite guards. We're going to play with that quite a lot. But again, someone's coming in, break the seal, draw as far up over your shoulder as you can, all the way around, and then big ol' center cut, and draw back in into our low guard. Things to note in the low guard, so in contrast to a lot of other martial arts, not a lot, but in a few, right? So our low guard in this style is, so in Kendo, Geidon is down here. In Italian sword fighting, it's with the blade forward. In Tutta Porta de Ferro, right? But in Gumdo, we're going to have our blade going this way, ideally about to use the false edge or the back of the sword in our next combination. So this is kind of the major introduction to our low guard, at least in terms of something more offensive. Now notice the way that I described the actual draw. Now, the way I just demonstrated it is the way you're going to see most schools, or at least most schools keeping up to date, will be teaching it, right? Ideally, the scabbard is essentially kind of like in our hip. We're going to draw it almost straight up, which is a little bit of a red flag, right? Almost straight up, and kind of almost like going to shimmy your shoulder past it as you move forward, and then as you sink into that stance, big old center cut. I want to give you a few alternatives, again, especially if you are willing to deviate from what most schools do, right? So what I personally like is the idea of you're almost like going to strike someone's forehead. So it's going out first, pinky ring middle, and you're going to move your body underneath it here, and then as you sink, big old center cut, right? This is very similar to interpretation in the beginning of Ssangsu 3, where you can kind of draw out first and move your body swoop up underneath for that initial strike. Very similar idea with this center cut. So if you're willing to try something a little bit different, it's a little bit fun. From here, we're going to use the back of the sword. So imagine someone's giving like a center cut or a diagonal cut. Probably not doing that way, but center cut or a diagonal cut on this way, using the false edge of the sword to strike it out. So it's the reverse, exact reverse of a diagonal, right? So you want to be using your left hand in conjunction with the right, but primarily using that left hand. Get a little more of a oomph, right, with that block. So you're going to be going up on that 45 as you step forward, hitting up over the side, and you're going to step forward again, uppercut, cutting up underneath the rib. So again, the idea is, again, nice and low. Ideally, you don't go back, and then you go forward again. Ideally, straight from here. A little cheat you can have is you're moving forward with it already, so you're already naturally giving it a prep. But from here, just straight up block, and you're going to follow it up with a second uppercut, again, aiming underneath the rib. So in practice, you may not do like the full range of motion this way. So for example, in the 7th Gyeokgum, it's actually up as a little bit shorter range for that uppercut. Instead of giving us that whole 1-2 motion, it's going to be a little bit tighter in the Gyeokgum, not in the form, but in the Gyeokgum. So it's 1-2 as opposed to 1-2, having that full range of motion for the uppercut. But for now, we want that, right? So we're here, give yourself tons of space, right? Because we're going to keep going that direction a little bit. So we're going to do the upper block uppercut, using the false edge, again the back of the sword, to sweep around. As I come back all the way around into a bomse or back stance, hitting off to the side like in the beginning of form 3, stepping back once more, striking. So again from the side, going straight on, right? So 1-2 in short stance, using the false edge to cover. Use that bomse, again, getting nice and deep as you can, around the head, bomse. Let's talk about those 2 blocks first, right? So in a lot of the Gumdo forms, you're gonna see blocks that come way offline like this, right? So theoretically, you're striking something out of the air, striking something coming out in front of you, or just something that's right there, just getting it out of the way, right? So the main thing I want you to focus on is the point of impact isn't the end here. You're very silly, right? Because if I'm way over here and someone like stops there, I'm very open. The idea is something's much deeper in, even on center line, if you want to think that far ahead. I want to strike it, follow through, right? That said, having that tip going that far out is a little excessive, a lot of fun stuff. So a way that I would modify this portion of the form, if you do want to be a little more application-centric as opposed to merely sticking the moves, right, is actually think more of it, instead of cutting across the body, think cutting forward, right? The more you cut forward, the more you're actually going to be able to displace the enemy's sword or the enemy cut coming in a lot more effectively, right? So instead of stepping back, whack to the side, think about coming in. That's why I like the bomb, so you can use your hips as a counterbalance to strike more forward this way, right? Same idea. One potential reason why you might be disengaging going all the way around is they are now pressuring go this way. Now I can go in, strike the back of the sword for the next part. This is why I really like, form 7 is one of my favorites. You're gonna make what I call a J-parry. I'm sure there's someone named J-parry somewhere, but it's making a J shape this way. You're going to make contact with the sword. You're going to make that parry as I tuck this back foot in, and you're going to counter with a diagonal cut, like so. So the idea again is, so again we just did our first block, second block, that sword is attached, I'm going to parry it this way, make sure my leg's out of the way. I'm going to follow up with the same side dive. Now I personally really like that parry. It's something that I try to use in my own sparring quite a lot, and I do agree with the next move, right? So I know a lot of people might be thinking like, oh, I can, parry it, why don't I just follow up with a shorter range cut, right? But again, imagine if I did just strike and I was parried off this way, sword's already on that side, it'll be easy to cover, as opposed to this side, the way I just parried it away from, I'm more likely to land a strike. If I want to make it even more applicable, I would also make sure my body is going off to the side. So instead of going straight in this way, I'm moving off to the side. So here, I can do like a triangle step if I want, and try to follow up from a different angle. I would find that a little more effective, but that's the application we're playing with. So give it a go. But that's the beginning of Form 7. 7's one of my favorite forms because it's a very tactical form, right? So you are more aware of what your opponent's doing and you're pairing it and you're moving out of the way. There's a lot more interesting things you can do with this form compared with some of the previous ones. So hopefully you have some fun with this. Both that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training.